August 8, 1944. Outskirts of Metz, France. The distant growl of artillery rolled across the Moselle Valley, a thunder that shook the stone walls of a commandeered farmhouse turned command post. Oberst Hans von Luck of the Panzer Lehr Division bent over a map spread across a wooden table. Cigarette smoke coiled in the stale air as he traced Allied movements with a gloved finger. Reports spoke of an American general advancing with reckless speed through the French countryside. Von Luck smirked. "The Americans have no stomach for sustained pursuit," he said to the officers around him, drawing quiet laughter. To them, this cowboy general, George S. Patton, was nothing more than a loud, impetuous brawler. Brave, perhaps, but incapable of sustaining a campaign beyond Normandy's beaches. What they didn't know was that the man they mocked had already set in motion one of the most rapid and relentless advances in modern military history. Before we continue with this remarkable story, if you're fascinated by untold military history and engineering marvels, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling us which World War II story you'd like to hear next. Now, back to the rain-soaked hills outside Metz, where confidence and contempt would soon collide. German officers at Metz felt secure in their logic. The Wehrmacht's defensive lines had been rebuilt in haste, yet they believed the geography of eastern France would favor them. Rivers, ridgelines, and fortified towns formed natural barriers that had repelled invaders for centuries. Beyond the Moselle lay the Siegfried Line, the West Wall, a belt of reinforced bunkers, and dragon's teeth built to protect the German heartland. The officers believed time was their ally. With the Allies exhausted from Normandy, their armor worn and supply lines stretched, the Americans, they reasoned, would soon halt to reorganize. The Panzer Lehr Division, though mauled during Operation Cobra, still represented one of Germany's elite mechanized formations. Its officers, veterans of Kursk and Normandy alike, viewed their American counterparts as tactically rigid. They considered the U.S. Army's advances a function of overwhelming material power, not strategic ingenuity. To them, Patton's speed was nothing more than wasteful bravado, a reckless display destined to collapse once the gasoline ran dry. Across the table, von Luck's adjutant, Hauptmann Dieter Rehfeld, scanned intercepted radio chatter. Reports from German reconnaissance aircraft described long columns of vehicles snaking through Brittany's backroads, jeeps, trucks, and tanks adorned with white stars. To the Luftwaffe pilots, they appeared chaotic and uncoordinated. "It looks like a circus," one pilot reported after observing a Third Army convoy near Le Mans. Von Luck chuckled at the thought. "Let them rush," he said, pouring another cup of bitter coffee. "They will bury themselves in their own fuel cans." But the intelligence reports were misleading. What German spotters mistook for disorganization was something far more dangerous: the visible expression of a new kind of warfare. Patton's Third Army was not simply moving fast, it was executing a coordinated pursuit on a continental scale. Every vehicle had its place, every movement timed with precision, every advance supported by logistics stretched to their limits yet functioning with astonishing efficiency. To understand why the Germans underestimated him, one must consider Patton's reputation. By 1944, he was known across Europe as a flamboyant figure, the general with pearl-handled revolvers and a volcanic temper. His public image obscured his deeper genius, meticulous preparation, and an understanding of armored warfare that rivaled any German strategist. To the Wehrmacht, he was a caricature of American excess. To his men, he was a force of nature. In the summer of 1944, German commanders saw Allied momentum as temporary. The Normandy breakout had indeed surprised them, but they believed the logistical strain would soon choke it off. Their war diaries described Allied supply lines beyond rational capacity. In Berlin, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht issued directives predicting that the Western Allies would reach an operational pause within weeks. The German General Staff dismissed reports of rapid American movements across France as tactical exaggerations. Patton's Third Army had only been reactivated days earlier, on August 1, 1944, yet by the 8th, its armored spearheads were already threatening to encircle entire German corps. The rapid advance was not improvisation. It was the result of years of study. Patton had spent decades analyzing mobile warfare, particularly the German blitzkrieg. He understood that in modern war, speed could substitute for numbers, and disruption could replace attrition. To his officers, he demanded discipline, aggression, and initiative. To the Germans, this combination was unthinkable. At Metz, Oberst von Luck's staff continued to mock Allied reports late into the night. They studied reconnaissance photos showing Patton's tanks clustered along rural roads, refueling under camouflage nets. "He moves too quickly to sustain supply," one officer said confidently. "His columns will stop before the Moselle." Their confidence was not arrogance, it was habit. German doctrine dictated that offense required deliberate buildup, and defense, given time, could bleed the attacker. Few could imagine an enemy capable of maintaining both momentum and cohesion. Yet deep behind the front, U.S. logistics officers were already orchestrating a miracle. Fuel depots, convoys, and rail hubs operated with industrial precision. The Red Ball Express, a network of trucks manned largely by African-American drivers, ran day and night to feed the Third Army's voracious needs. While von Luck's staff slept, American vehicles thundered eastward, headlights dimmed, engines rumbling like a distant tide. By dawn on August 9th, reports from forward German units grew more alarming. Entire towns, Avranches, Rennes, Le Mans, had fallen in quick succession. German retreat routes were collapsing faster than command orders could be transmitted. Still, the officers near Metz held to their belief. The Americans would soon run out of fuel. In their minds, Patton's speed was self-destructive, an excess of energy without endurance. They did not yet realize that Patton's army was fueled by more than gasoline. It was driven by an unrelenting will, his will, to destroy the enemy through ceaseless motion. Every kilometer gained deepened the psychological blow to German morale. The laughter in that farmhouse would not last. Within weeks, those same officers would find their lines collapsing before an advance they had deemed impossible. The hills of Lorraine would soon echo not with mockery, but with the thunder of engines and the sound of defeat. What von Luck and his peers failed to grasp was that the mathematics of modern warfare had changed. Momentum, once viewed as a byproduct of victory, had become its very instrument. The transformation had already begun. The U.S. Third Army re-entered history on August 1, 1944, when it was officially reactivated under the command of VI, General George S. Patton, Jr. The man who now stood at its helm had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. To the public, Patton was a headline figure, brilliant, controversial, and impatient. To his soldiers, he was both revered and feared. But behind the theatrical persona was a lifetime of study. His understanding of mobility, logistics, and shock was not impulsive flair. It was the result of methodical preparation. Patton's fascination with mechanized warfare began long before the Second World War. As early as 1917, he commanded the first American tank school in France, teaching principles that few yet understood. Between the wars, he devoured every available study of military mobility, especially those emerging from Germany. He read Heinz Guderian's Achtung Panzer, Shh, and examined how rapid movement could fracture an enemy's cohesion before decisive battle. To Patton, tanks were not support units. They were the primary instruments of modern warfare. By the time the United States entered World War II, Patton had refined his philosophy into what he called relentless pursuit. He tested it first in North Africa, 1942–43, commanding the Taku Corps after the American setback at Kasserine Pass. There, he imposed strict discipline, reorganized logistics, and restored confidence. His next test came in Sicily, 1943, where his 7th Army advanced 300 miles in just 38 days, outflanking the British 8th Army and capturing Palermo and Messina. Though his aggressiveness often brought him into conflict with superiors, it also produced undeniable results. The Third Army that Patton inherited in August 1944 was an immense and flexible force. It comprised more than 250,000 men, over the 500 tanks, and 4,500 artillery pieces. Its armored divisions, such as the 4th, 6th, and 11th, were supported by mobile infantry and engineers, all trained to exploit speed and coordination. The Army's air cover came from the Atzradyanai's Tactical Air Command, led by Major General Otto P. Wayland, ensuring constant communication between air and ground units. Together they formed what military analysts would later describe as a blitzkrieg in reverse, an Allied army adopting, refining, and surpassing the German model. But even the most aggressive army was powerless without supply. Patton knew this better than anyone. "My men can eat their belts," he once said, "but my tanks have to have gas." In late August 1944, the Third Army required approximately 400,000 gallons of fuel every day, enough to fill more than 7,000 standard barrels. Keeping that flow unbroken was the task of the Red Ball Express, an extraordinary logistical network created within days of the breakout from Normandy, operating 1 to 24 hours a day. The Red Ball Express consisted of nearly 1,000 trucks, manned largely by African-American drivers. Their routes stretched from the supply ports of Normandy to the front lines of eastern France, often under enemy air attack or along roads reduced to mud by summer rain. By late August, they were delivering 2,500 tons of supplies daily, feeding not only Patton's tanks but the entire momentum of the Western Front. The drivers, often working on minimal rest, called it hauling victory. German intelligence grossly misunderstood this system. Intercepted messages described chaotic American logistics and uncoordinated convoys. The Wehrmacht's staff analysts assumed that the rapid advance was temporary, an overextension that would soon collapse from fuel shortages. But what they failed to grasp was that the American logistical machine, while imperfect, had achieved an unprecedented rhythm. The U.S. Army's motorized transport network could reroute supplies on short notice, convert captured fuel depots for use within hours, and move entire armored columns forward without rail support. Patton's emphasis on speed was matched by his precision in planning. Every officer in his command carried a printed operations sheet detailing routes, objectives, and fallback positions. Orders were short and unmistakable. He demanded initiative from his subordinates, encouraging divisional commanders to exploit openings without waiting for higher approval. This decentralization allowed the Third Army to react faster than German forces accustomed to rigid command hierarchies. To the German High Command, the contrast was striking. Their panzer divisions, once symbols of mobility, were now paralyzed by fuel shortages and fragmented communication. After the failure in Normandy, Germany's logistical structure was collapsing. The Allied bombing campaign had crippled rail lines and depots, forcing panzers to rely on horse-drawn carts for resupply. At the same time, Allied armor consumed resources at an industrial scale. By September 1944, American truck convoys were moving 5 times more tonnage per day than the entire German supply effort on the Western Front. Patton's operational tempo forced the enemy into a defensive posture. He used geography as a weapon, striking along multiple routes to create confusion. Where the Germans expected a single thrust, Patton divided his corps into converging movements, ensuring that no flank remained predictable. This flexibility made German counterattacks ineffective. Their commanders could not anticipate where to concentrate. Reserves because Patton's advances appeared everywhere at once. The transformation of Allied warfare in 1944 was not purely mechanical, it was intellectual. Patton's methods turned logistics from a burden into a weapon. He believed that every gallon of fuel and every spare part should serve a tactical purpose. His staff established forward refueling points within captured towns, turning each conquest into an opportunity for renewed advance. Maintenance units operated almost as combat troops, repairing tanks within sight of enemy lines. Meanwhile, within the Allied command structure, Patton's energy created tension. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, admired Patton's effectiveness but worried about his impulsiveness. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, directing operations in the north, viewed him as dangerously unpredictable. Yet both men recognized that Patton's drive had shattered the German western defense faster than any planner had expected. The groundwork for this momentum was laid during Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944. As American air power pulverized German defenses near St. Lo, ground forces under Bradley and Patton prepared to exploit the breach. Once unleashed, the Third Army surged forward in multiple directions, south toward Brittany and east toward the Loire. This movement was not spontaneous chaos. It was the culmination of logistical and doctrinal preparation perfected over years. While German generals ridiculed the Americans as amateurs with fuel cans, Patton's doctrine was rewriting modern war. His system of mobile warfare combined precision timing, delegated authority, and relentless pursuit. In doing so, he demonstrated that an army's striking power was not merely its weapons, but its ability to sustain continuous motion. By early August, the Red Ball Express was delivering fuel faster than German intelligence could record its routes. Patton's columns crossed France with an average advance rate of 20 miles per day, eclipsing anything achieved by German panzer groups since 1940. To the enemy, it seemed incomprehensible that such movement could be maintained. To Patton, it was simply proof that preparation and discipline were as decisive as firepower. What the Germans dismissed as amateur enthusiasm was, in truth, a calculated system of perpetual advance. Every supply route, every convoy, every tank battalion was part of a synchronized organism driven by one will. Patton had turned mobility into doctrine and logistics into strategy. The enemy still mocked his methods, but the results were becoming undeniable. By mid-August 1944, the first cracks were visible in the German command's confidence. Reports from the front described American armored divisions appearing far beyond predicted lines of movement. Entire sectors were being bypassed, encircled, and cut off before reinforcements could respond. What the Wehrmacht had believed to be the limits of Allied capability were being rewritten in real time. The transformation was not complete yet, but it had begun. The Third Army's momentum was accelerating, and soon the Germans would face the full demonstration of what they had so confidently dismissed. August 1st, 1944. Normandy, France. The fields near Avranches trembled beneath the roar of engines. What began as a narrow breakout from the hedgerows had become an unstoppable surge. At dawn, the Third Army rolled into motion under Patton's direct command. Columns of Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and trucks advanced through the dust-choked lanes, headlights off, antennas whipping in the wind. The breakout from Normandy. Operation Cobra's final act was underway, and the German Western Front was about to disintegrate. The initial objective was simple: push south and widen the corridor opened by General Omar Bradley's First Army. But what followed over the next 2 weeks transformed the Western campaign. Between August 1st and August 13th, 1944, Patton's Third Army covered nearly 100 miles, seizing Rennes, Le Mans, and threatening to encircle the remnants of the German Seventh Army. His forces advanced faster than supply maps could be updated, creating a confusion so complete that German field reports began referring to phantom divisions, appearing where none should be. For the Germans, the rapid advance was incomprehensible. General Paul Hauser, commanding the Seventh Army, attempted to organize a withdrawal from Brittany, but his retreat paths vanished before his eyes. Patton's armored divisions were no longer fighting set-piece battles. They were hunting. The 4th Armored Division, under Major General John S. Wood, slashed through western France with astonishing precision. In less than 72 hours, it captured Rennes, then pivoted toward Le Mans. Each movement was calculated to encircle rather than confront. German intelligence reports from the period read like dispatches from a collapsing world. One captured radio message, dated August 6 to described the situation bluntly. Enemy armor moves with the speed of a storm. We can neither predict their axis nor block their approach. A later assessment from an officer in the 47th Panzer Corps was even more despairing. Patton is moving like a panzer army on methamphetamines. The success of the breakout stemmed from Patton's ability to turn mobility into pressure. Instead of attacking fortified positions head-on, he bypassed them, isolating German strongpoints and cutting their lines of retreat. His staff called it the whirlpool, a series of converging maneuvers that pulled enemy units into encirclement before they could re-establish order. At Le Mans, the Third Army's movement threatened to trap nearly 50,000 German troops. Patton's columns raced east while the Canadian First Army pressed from the north. The jaws of the encirclement closed near Falaise, where retreating divisions of the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army became trapped in a cauldron of artillery fire. The Falaise pocket became one of the most catastrophic defeats in German military history. For the German commanders, the collapse was both tactical and psychological. The Wehrmacht had built its reputation on speed, precision, and initiative, the very qualities now wielded against it. Reports from field headquarters showed disbelief bordering on paralysis. "They appear everywhere at once," one officer wrote. "Their columns are like water. When we block one path, they find another." In just over 10 days, the Third Army's spearheads captured or destroyed 50,000 German soldiers, obliterating armored units that had once been the core of the Western defenses. The 729th Infantry Division was annihilated near Argentan. Elements of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, lost nearly all their remaining armor. The Luftwaffe, crippled and unable to provide reconnaissance, could no longer track the pace of Patton's advance. Patton's own command diary for August 12th recorded the turning point with characteristic brevity. "The war is now one of movement. The enemy has lost the initiative, and we must never give it back." His subordinates understood the message. Momentum itself had become the weapon. The impact on German morale was immediate. Prisoners captured near Le Mans described confusion and exhaustion. Many had been marching for days without orders, cut off from communications, surrounded by enemy units they could not locate on their maps. The Third Army's pace shattered the German command structure, forcing local commanders to make desperate decisions without coordination. Even German generals began to acknowledge that Patton's operations were unlike anything they had encountered. General Günther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Kluge, later wrote in his post-war analysis, "The American general's movements were fluid beyond belief. His divisions advanced like cavalry of another century, swift, daring, and precise. We could not entrench against air and armor that moved so fast. The tactical methods behind this advance were deceptively simple. Patton's corps operated on a doctrine of bound and leap. One division attacked while another maneuvered around the flank. Supply convoys were assigned pre-planned routes and forward depots, ensuring fuel never ran dry. Air-ground coordination allowed fighter bombers to strike ahead of armored thrusts, clearing ambushes before they could form. Each success fed the next. German counterattacks failed because they relied on static assumptions. At Mortain, Hauser attempted to cut the American spearhead by striking its flank. But by the time his panzer columns reached their start line, Patton's armor had already bypassed them, threatening their rear. The speed of American redeployment turned every German move into an act of self-encirclement. By mid-August, German situation reports no longer used the language of counteroffensives. Instead, they spoke of survival movements. The once proud divisions that had invaded France in 1940 were now fighting to escape it. Every mile gained by the Third Army further compressed the German position and deepened the chaos. At the Allied level, the results exceeded even the planners' expectations. General Bradley noted in his communications with Supreme Headquarters, "Patton's performance is without precedent. The enemy's resistance is collapsing under pressure of mobility alone." Meanwhile, the British staff, accustomed to methodical advances, watched with astonishment as entire regions fell without major set-piece battles. The Falaise encirclement marked the final death of German hopes in France. Out of the 100,000 men trapped, barely half escaped. Most of their vehicles, guns, and tanks were abandoned or destroyed. Aerial photographs of the pocket showed a landscape littered with wreckage, columns of burning armor stretching for miles. The speed of the collapse defied even the Allied intelligence estimates. By August 23rd, Patton's Third Army had advanced so far that it required an entirely new operational map. The offensive that German officers had dismissed as reckless had evolved into a mechanized pursuit unmatched in modern warfare. In less than 3 weeks, the Third Army had broken through Brittany, destroyed the German Seventh Army, and liberated 1/3 of France. The German High Command finally recognized what was happening. Okay. Communications from late August described Patton's force as a mobile army group of unknown size, warning that its rapid maneuvers could penetrate the Reich frontier before winter. The underestimation that began in laughter had become a matter of survival. The turning point was clear. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the plains of France, the Third Army had demonstrated that speed, coordination, and logistics could achieve what brute strength could not. The German command had misjudged Patton as reckless. In truth, he was executing a calculated campaign that turned movement into destruction. What had begun as a breakout was now a pursuit, a relentless, precise, and disciplined storm. The German generals who once mocked Patton's ambition were learning that he was not just fast. He was unstoppable. By September 1944, the thunder of Patton's engines had rolled across more than 300 miles of liberated territory. The German armies that had fled from Normandy were now cornered behind the Moselle River, clutching at the remnants of defensive coherence. Yet the man Berlin had once dismissed as a reckless amateur refused to slow. Even as the Third Army's fuel reserves dwindled and autumn rains turned the roads into rivers of mud, General George S. Patton demanded one thing from his men: momentum. The speed that had terrified the Germans in August now evolved into endurance. Patton's formations, once racing across open country, began hammering into fortified towns along the Lorraine Corridor, a region historically soaked in blood between France and Germany. His officers called it the War of Bridges and Rivers. Every crossing, every town seized, was another step toward Germany's frontier. To the enemy, the Americans should have been exhausted. Instead, they were accelerating. The Third Army faced its most formidable challenge yet: the heavily defended cities of Nancy and Metz. These were not rural crossroads, but strongholds reinforced by pre-war fortresses dating back to the 19th century. The Germans, determined to hold Lorraine at all costs, committed the 5th Panzer Army and TAS 11th Panzer Division to resist. Their orders were explicit: halt Patton's drive before it reached the Saar. Patton's method for breaking these defenses was unorthodox. Rather than concentrating overwhelming firepower at a single point, he ordered multiple thrusts across wide fronts, forcing the Germans to stretch their limited reserves. His commanders, Major General Manton Eddy's 13th Corps and Major General Walton Walker's XTX Corps, moved simultaneously along parallel axes, confusing German intelligence. Even as one corps engaged enemy fortifications, another slipped across river crossings under cover of artillery and smoke. The Moselle crossing at La Pont-à-Mousson in early September demonstrated the audacity of Patton's approach. Despite swollen rivers, entrenched defenders, and fuel shortages, American engineers bridged the Moselle under direct fire. By September 12th, Nancy had fallen, and Patton's spearheads pushed deeper into Lorraine. The Germans counterattacked repeatedly, but could not regain the initiative. In Berlin, disbelief turned to alarm. Reports from the Army Group G headquarters described continuous pressure without pause and enemy movements beyond the capacity of our rail net to counter. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, recalled to command the Western Front, wrote to OKW, "No army in history has ever moved so far, so fast on so little." That observation was not exaggeration. The Third Army was living off improvisation. By mid-September, fuel shortages had reached critical levels. The Red Ball Express, strained by the distance from the Normandy ports, was operating beyond capacity. Trucks ran 20-hour days. Drivers slept in their cabs. Yet despite losing nearly 20% of its vehicles to breakdowns, the supply chain adapted. Mobile repair units cannibalized damaged trucks for parts. Fuel drums were parachuted to forward units when convoys were delayed. Patton's quartermasters calculated consumption down to the gallon, ensuring tanks never stood idle for lack of gas. This adaptation under stress became a defining feature of the campaign. Patton's officers understood that speed without supply was suicide, but they also knew that hesitation invited German recovery. The solution was to maintain tempo through flexibility. Local commanders were empowered to seize enemy depots, refuel from captured stockpiles, and requisition civilian vehicles. "We are fighting a war of engines," Patton told his staff, "and engines cannot wait." The Germans, struggling to comprehend this rhythm, began relying on fortified towns as improvised strongpoints. Metz, in particular, became their symbol of defiance. Encircled by 43 fortifications, it was commanded by General Hermann Balck's First Army, which vowed to hold until the last shell. The defenders believed the Americans would break against the fortresses as they had in 1914. Instead, Patton chose to isolate them, bypassing several and reducing others through methodical siege tactics supported by close air support. At Aricourt, between September 18th and 29th, the 4th Armored Division faced one of the largest tank battles on the Western Front. The Bastogne 11th Panzer Division launched multiple counterattacks in fog and rain, attempting to halt Patton's momentum. But the Americans, using superior reconnaissance and artillery coordination, destroyed 285 German tanks while losing fewer than 30 cowboys of their own. The engagement shattered what remained of the German armored strength in Lorraine. Captured reports from German headquarters after Aricourt conveyed growing despair. One commander wrote, "Our formations no longer maneuver, they retreat." Another concluded, "The enemy moves with impossible coordination." This phrase, repeated in multiple documents, reflected a dawning realization. What appeared as chaos in August was, in fact, disciplined speed. By October, the German 7th Army's communications were collapsing, roads clogged with retreating vehicles and civilian refugees. Allied air patrols roamed unchallenged overhead, destroying bridges and convoys. Patton's staff estimated that by November, his army had captured over 80,000 prisoners, liberated thousands of square miles, and advanced deeper into enemy territory than any other Western Allied force. But success carried its own strain. Rain turned Lorraine's plains into quagmires. Tanks sank axle-deep in mud. Artillery ammunition ran low, and rations were rationed again. The soldiers called it the long grind. Yet morale remained high. Patton's leadership, his relentless inspections, his fiery speeches, his visible presence on the front lines kept the army focused. "Courage is fear holding on a minute longer," he told them, echoing the words that had carried him through every campaign. German propaganda attempted to portray the slowdown as proof that the American advance had finally stalled. Yet intercepted German orders revealed panic. Commanders begged for reinforcements that no longer existed. The Wehrmacht's fuel crisis had reached catastrophic proportions. Some divisions had fewer than 10 operational tanks, and meanwhile, the United States was producing nearly 2,000 new tanks each month. The balance of mobility was irreversible. In November, Metz finally fell after a protracted siege. The German garrison, commanded by General Anton Dunckern, surrendered, 16,000 men. After weeks of encirclement and bombardment, Patton entered the city under pouring rain, his boots caked in the same mud his men had fought through. "Fixed fortifications," he remarked, "are monuments to the stupidity of man." As the Third Army crossed into the Saar Valley, its reputation was no longer questioned by either friend or foe. Allied correspondents described Patton's campaign as a hurricane of steel. His operations were studied in London and Washington as examples of how modern mechanized warfare could overwhelm even experienced opponents. German officers who had once dismissed him as a reckless cavalryman now regarded him with a mixture of fear and admiration. "We underestimated the Americans," wrote one captured colonel from the 11th Panzer Division. "Their general fights with the spirit we once claimed as our own." By late autumn, snow was falling over Lorraine. The campaign that began as an experiment in speed had become a demonstration of sustained mechanized power. The Third Army, though strained by weather and fuel shortages, remained cohesive, disciplined, and deadly. The laughter that had echoed in the German headquarters at Metz 2 months earlier had vanished, replaced by the sound of retreating engines and collapsing lines. The escalation was complete. Patton's army had advanced hundreds of miles, captured tens of thousands of prisoners, and proven that willpower, coordination, and logistics could conquer even nature itself. Yet winter was coming, and with it, a challenge that would test the Third Army beyond endurance. The stage was set for the decisive confrontation that would define Patton's legend. December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. Snow drifted across the frozen pines as the German army launched its last desperate offensive of the war. Operation Wacht am Rhein, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. For 3 days, the American lines along the Ardennes bent under the pressure of Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army and Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army. In the fog and snow, entire divisions were overrun. The small Belgian town of Bastogne was encircled, and the Germans believed they had regained the initiative. But far to the south, General George S. Patton was already preparing to turn his entire army north, an impossible maneuver that would become one of the most extraordinary operational feats in modern warfare. The transformation of the Third Army from August 1944 to February 1945 was without precedent. In just 6 months, Patton's forces had advanced more than 600 miles, liberated thousands of towns, and captured 1.2 million German soldiers. They had crossed rivers once deemed impassable, destroyed or captured over 12,000 enemy tanks and vehicles, and demonstrated that mechanized mobility, when fused with unrelenting discipline, could break even the strongest army. The Battle of the Bulge would seal that reputation. When the German offensive struck, Patton's Third Army was positioned in Lorraine, facing east toward the Saar. To pivot an entire army of over 150,000 men, with divisions spread across 100 miles of front, required coordination of breathtaking complexity. Yet within 48 hours, Patton executed the turn. His staff, led by Major General Hugh Gaffey and Major General Manton Eddy, reoriented entire corps northward. Fuel and ammunition convoys were redirected overnight. Artillery batteries rolled onto frozen roads. By December 19th, while most Allied commanders were still confirming the scale of the German attack, Patton's vanguard was already moving toward Bastogne. A German intelligence officer later wrote in disbelief, "Patton's speed was not human, it was elemental." This was no exaggeration. Through sleet, ice, and snow, the Third Army advanced at a rate of down 10 to 15 miles per day, despite sub-zero temperatures and continuous enemy resistance. Roads became impassable, bridges collapsed, yet the columns pressed on. Engineers laid timber crossings under fire. Tank crews fought in white camouflage, their engines running day and night to prevent freezing. The momentum that had begun in Normandy was now driving straight into the heart of winter. On December the 26th, the siege of Bastogne was broken. The 4th Armored Division, spearheading the relief, smashed through German lines at Assenois and entered the town just after dusk. The operation, planned and executed in less than 4 days, stunned both friend and foe. To Allied commanders, it was proof that Patton's army could maneuver with lightning precision even in the most hostile conditions. To the Germans, it was confirmation that their last gamble in the West had failed. After Bastogne, Patton's advance resumed eastward. The Third Army pivoted again, driving across Luxembourg toward the Saar River and the borders of Germany itself. Despite blizzards and supply shortages, the pace of operations never slackened. In January 1945, Patton's forces seized Bitburger, Gad, Echternach, and Trier, while simultaneously smashing German resistance along the Siegfried Line, the same fortifications that had once been considered impregnable. The results were staggering. From August 1944 to February 1945, the Third Army destroyed or captured over 12,000 enemy vehicles, abîmed over 1 million prisoners, and advanced farther than any Allied formation in Western Europe. The U.S. Army's official records note that its divisions covered a combined distance exceeding 600 miles, an operational tempo never before achieved in continental warfare. These achievements were not merely the result of numbers. Patton's command philosophy transformed every component of his army into a weapon of mobility. Artillery was used not for static bombardment, but as a rolling wall of fire preceding the advance. Engineers worked as frontline troops, bridging rivers under fire within hours of seizure. The Red Ball Express, though exhausted, continued to deliver thousands of tons of fuel and ammunition daily, keeping the offensive alive even as weather and attrition threatened collapse. German field commanders were left paralyzed by the pace. "He turned the map of Europe into a racetrack," wrote one British observer. Another German colonel captured near Trier confessed during interrogation, "We couldn't stop him because we didn't understand him." The Wehrmacht, once the model of mobility, had been overtaken by a force that used its own doctrine against it, only faster, larger, and more disciplined. Behind this velocity was industrial might. By late 1944, American production had reached levels unimaginable to the German economy. The United States had manufactured $88,000 tanks to Germany's 146,000, so 300,000 aircraft to Germany's 20,000, and millions of vehicles that enabled a war of constant motion. Patton understood that every logistical advantage was also a tactical weapon. "The measure of victory," he wrote, "is not the number of shells fired, but how fast you can move the guns to fire them." As the Third Army crossed into Germany in February 1945, resistance crumbled. Cities such as Saarlautern and Kaiserslautern fell in rapid succession. The shattered remnants of German divisions, many composed of teenagers and Volkssturm militia, could no longer maintain coherent fronts. Official German war reports described an unbroken Allied advance. Even the feared 11th Panzer Division, once a symbol of armored supremacy, had been reduced to scattered pockets fighting with captured weapons. Patton's use of weather and mobility as tools of strategy became legendary. During the Battle of the Bulge, he famously requested a chaplain to compose a prayer for clear skies to allow Allied aircraft to resume operations. Within 24 hours, the clouds lifted, and the U.S. Army Air Forces unleashed devastating attacks on German columns. To his men, it was proof that their commander could command not just soldiers, but the elements themselves. Yet behind the bravado was calculation. Patton's intelligence units tracked German fuel movements, predicting where enemy armor would stall. His headquarters used weather forecasts to plan offensives when German air support was grounded. Every action was driven by the principle of momentum. Never allow the enemy time to reorganize. By early 1945, the Third Army's achievements had redefined operational warfare. In 6 months, it had liberated over 12,000 towns, captured nearly a quarter of all German prisoners taken on the Western Front, and advanced at an average rate of 5 miles per day through sustained combat. Even the Soviet General Staff, observing from the east, remarked with respect, "Patton conducts mechanized war as Guderian once did, without hesitation." German testimonies after the war reveal the depth of their shock. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, who had commanded against Patton during the Bulge, later admitted, "His speed was not human, it was elemental. We thought we understood movement warfare. We did not." In post-war debriefings, captured officers described Patton's operations as chaos made precise, a phrase that would enter military studies for decades afterward. The statistics told their own story. In the same period, the Third Army consumed 1.3 million gallons of fuel daily, fired over 10 million artillery shells, and advanced through terrain that had stalled entire armies for years. The U.S. War Department summarized it succinctly. "No army in modern history has moved so far, so fast, on so little." By February 1945, Patton's tanks were rolling across the Rhine-Way, the symbolic gateway to Germany. His soldiers crossed under fire, pushing toward the Saar and Palatinate, while exhausted German survivors surrendered in waves. The campaign that had begun with laughter in Metz now ended with silence on the Rhine. The mockery had turned to awe. For the Germans, the overwhelming proof was undeniable. Patton's Third Army had not only broken their lines, it had shattered the myth of German military superiority. His doctrine of relentless speed, supported by industrial precision and unyielding morale, had redefined modern war. What began as an underestimation had evolved into a realization. The Americans had mastered the art of movement. The numbers, the outcomes, and the testimonies left no doubt. Between August 1944 and February 1945, George S. Patton's Third Army achieved what no other force in Europe could, advancing 600 miles, capturing over 1 million prisoners, and proving that discipline, logistics, and willpower could conquer even the most formidable enemy. The proof was complete. But the legacy of that proof, the lessons it left behind, would echo long after the guns fell silent. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the scale of George S. Patton's achievement stood unmatched in modern warfare. His Third Army had liberated over 12,000 towns and cities, captured 2 million prisoners, destroyed thousands of enemy vehicles, and advanced farther than any Allied formation in Western Europe. In less than a year, it had transformed from an untested command in Normandy into a force that embodied the full power of American industrial and tactical ingenuity. The mockery that had echoed through German command posts the previous summer was gone, replaced by silence, awe, and grudging admiration. The final statistics told a story of relentless precision. Between August 1944 and May 1945, the Third Army covered more than 600 miles from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Czechoslovakia. Its soldiers sustained under 45,000 casualties, a heavy price, yet one far smaller than the destruction inflicted on the enemy. The Army's spearheads crossed 6 major rivers, broke through the Siegfried Line, and liberated tens of thousands of prisoners from concentration camps. When Patton finally halted his advance near Pilsen, his armored columns were within striking distance of Prague itself. Patton's campaign shattered long-held military assumptions. Before 1944, most armies viewed speed as unsustainable, something to be exploited briefly, not maintained over months. The Third Army proved otherwise. Through disciplined logistics and decentralized command, Patton demonstrated that mobility could become the cornerstone of modern strategy. His operations showed that wars could be won not by attrition alone, but by continuous motion that denied the enemy time to recover. The Germans, who had once considered Patton reckless, became his most ardent analysts. In post-war debriefings conducted by the U.S. Army Historical Division, in 1946-47, Dewey, captured Wehrmacht officers consistently singled out Patton as the Allies' most formidable field commander. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, once the architect of Germany's Western campaigns, summarized it bluntly. Patton was the best. He understood war as we did, but fought it better. Hasso von Manteuffel, who had opposed him in both Lorraine and the Ardennes, echoed that sentiment. Patton's speed was not recklessness, it was calculation. He used movement as a weapon in itself. Such assessments carried weight because they came from men who had built the doctrine Patton mastered. Their testimony confirmed that what the Germans had initially dismissed as amateur enthusiasm had in fact evolved into a superior form of mechanized warfare. The Oberkommando des Heeres, the German Army High Command, concluded in its post-war studies that Patton's campaign in France and Germany was a masterclass in operational mobility. The same army that had once prided itself on blitzkrieg now acknowledged that the Americans had perfected it. Patton's methods reshaped the U.S. Army's post-war doctrine. The principles he employed, speed, initiative, and logistical integration, became the foundation for the pentomic and air-land battle concepts that defined Cold War strategy. In Korea, U.S. armored units adopted Patton's practice of decentralized command and rapid redeployment. Decades later, during Operation Desert Storm, 1991, American commanders explicitly cited the Third Army's 1944 campaign as a model for mechanized warfare in open terrain. General Norman Schwarzkopf, himself a student of Patton's operations, called him the original practitioner of modern maneuver warfare. Even beyond the battlefield, Patton's leadership philosophy left a lasting imprint. His insistence on personal discipline, constant readiness, and offensive initiative became hallmarks of the U.S. Army ethos. His speeches, demanding courage, aggression, and pride, remained part of officer training for generations. He had believed that morale was as vital as materiel, and his campaigns proved that an army driven by will could outpace one sustained by fear. The psychological effect of his command style was visible even to his enemies. German officers recalled that the mere mention of Patton's name on the radio caused anxiety among frontline troops. They regarded him as unpredictable, capable of striking anywhere, at any time. In that sense, his reputation became a weapon of war. General Walter Warlimont, deputy chief of the German operations staff, would later remark, "Patton fought as if time itself were his enemy. We could never synchronize against him." Historians have debated whether Patton's aggression bordered on recklessness, yet the results were indisputable. Every major operation under his command ended in victory. He balanced daring maneuvers with meticulous planning, ensuring that speed never descended into chaos. His critics saw impulsiveness, his soldiers saw purpose. He once wrote, "The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his." That clarity of intent defined his approach from Tunisia to the Rhine. By war's end, Patton's Third Army had not merely won battles, it had redefined the concept of an army in motion. In 6 months, it demonstrated that a force could advance faster than its enemy could comprehend, supplied by a logistics network that itself became a weapon. The Red Ball Express, the armor, the artillery, the engineers, all moved with the rhythm of a single will. It was the practical realization of the theory Patton had studied since 1917, that speed, properly managed, was the ultimate force multiplier. The Germans who had laughed at Patton's reckless speed learned the cost of underestimation. Oberst Hans von Luck, the same officer who had mocked him near Metz in August 1944, survived the war to write his memoirs. Reflecting on the campaign, he admitted, "We believed Patton's advance unsustainable. We were wrong. His army moved with the precision of a machine and the spirit of a crusade." The statement encapsulated the transformation that had taken place, not only in the battlefields of Europe, but in the minds of those who once considered themselves unmatched. Patton's death in December 1945, just months after victory, ensured that his legend would never fade. To his soldiers, he remained the embodiment of relentless drive. To historians, he stood as proof that preparation and boldness could coexist. and to his former enemies, he was the American general who had understood their art of war better than they did themselves. The final analysis of the German General Staff, compiled in 1947, concluded with a line that captured the essence of his legacy. He fought with speed as others fight with strength. From the deserts of North Africa to the river crossings of Germany, Patton proved that disciplined aggression could achieve what caution could not. His Third Army turned mockery into fear, retreat into rout, and movement into victory. The Germans had once laughed at his speed. In the end, they were crushed by it.